Well, today is September 13th, 2023, and my name is Ben Jones, and we are recording an oral history interview for the South Dakota State Historical Society with Ron Williamson. Ron, I wonder if you can state your full name and spell it, please.
Ronald Frank Williamson, R-O-N-A-L-D, capital F-R-A-C-E, capital W-I-L-L-I-A-M-S-O-N.
Great. And do we have your permission to record this interview?
Yes.
Where and when were you born?
I was born here in South Dakota on December 31st, 1941.
Okay. And you grew up, though, your family moved to DeSmet at some point?
No, we didn't have a hospital in DeSmet.
Oh, I see.
At that time. Now, my brother and my sister were all born in DeSmet, but we had to go to Huron my dad had to go to Huron on New Year's Eve with my mom, obviously, to have an exciting evening.
Yes.
So anyway, yeah, DeSmet is my hometown.
Okay.
And except for the few minutes I stayed in Huron, why that's where I grew up at and went to high school there and so forth.
Okay. What was your first job as a kid?
First one was, actually I had two of them. One was delivering the Minneapolis Sunday Tribune every morning, and the other one was working for my dad, who had a machine business and car dealership. And the interesting thing there was that he put me on the time clock. So if I punched in the morning when I got there, if I went to lunch, I punched out, and so on and so forth. And then that went to the bookkeeper, and that's how I was paid.
Okay.
And it was it wasn't a very good salary, but it got me by.
Yeah. And you learned about showing up on time?
Yes, sir.
Kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What kind of things did your dad have you doing?
Sweeping floors, washing cars,
Okay.
greasing cars in those days. I didn't do any mechanics work, but all the stuff and changing tires, that was always, because tires were a good sale, and then some of the tractor tires were a little bit large, but he had me doing that too.
Okay. So where was the dealership located?
It was at the north end of the Calumet Avenue, downtown Avenue. Right, there's a grocery store there now.
Oh.
And so that was the one. And then he had the implement dealer was down on the highway, on Highway 14. And of course, being my dad, why he had to have a couple other businesses. Why we had a Dairy Queen, which was also down on Highway 14, and then we had Tommy's Cabins that were also down on Highway 14. So there was ample opportunity to try to make some money.
Right. And what kind of activities did you do in high school?
Well, in high school, I played football, basketball, track. I did all those, did the chorus. All the stuff all the extra activities that were available, that was basically about what everybody got a chance to participate in. I was 4 years varsity in football, 3 years varsity in basketball, track probably maybe 1 year varsity. I don't know. I wasn't that fast, but they were all good for growing up in DeSmet.
Yeah. You see, you delivered the Minneapolis paper.
Yes.
How early did that come, or what was the?
It came early in the morning, and Minneapolis used to run a truck that started in Minneapolis and delivered. I don't know how far west they went on 14, but basically they dropped them off at the standard station on Highway 14, and then there were two, myself and a fellow named Dennis Muser were the were the paper guys, paper boys on Sunday morning.
Okay.
And so that you'd pick them up and try to get them out before church because you had to go to church also. So
Right.
it was an early, usually I rolled my dad out of bed and had him have him come and help me out with them.
Okay. So what's the path to West Point then? How did you?
Oh, well, it started, first of all, the reason I had the idea was because of a person named Roger Fritzl, who had gone to the Naval Academy 2 years, he was 2 years ahead of me. And so I got to thinking that would be something that would be worthwhile to do. And my quick story on it is I went in to talk to the principal and ask him if he had any information on West Point. And I won't tell you his name. And so, so he looked at me and he says, well, who wants to know? And I said, well, I do. And he said, well, you don't have a chance, and I don't have any information on West Point either. Wow. So that kind of got my dander up a little bit, and I worked on it then. So a big part of it was, I did this during my junior year, but during that time, Aubrey Sherwood, who was the editor of the newspaper, he had helped Roger get into the Naval Academy, so he started me on my journey to the academy, and his idea was to get myself, as he did with Roger, to everything that Senator Munt did in South Dakota within a radius. So, because in those days, it was more of a political appointment than it is today. And I mean, you still had to go through all the process and everything, but the politics of it was, and my father wasn't really a politician or anything, so Aubrey would get me there. And so I heard, I don't know how many speeches from Senator Munt, and as people know, he was quite the orator. And once he got started, why, it was a late night every night. And we went to Lake Norden and Lake Preston and all the surrounding communities when he was giving his speeches. So anyway, that's how it all got started. So then I got to the situation where, for some reason, I thought, well, I'm not going to make this, and I'm not sure, I don't know that much about it. And so I sort of dropped it off on my senior year. And then I went to Augustana for 1 year after graduation in 1949. And then at graduation, not at Augustana, I started out okay, and then I sort of ran out of money and everything else. So I thought, I better get started on this West Point deal again. So that's how I picked it up again, and I used my grade point at Augustana, which got me in as far as academics was concerned, and then I didn't have any problem with the PT or the physical part of it, and so on and so forth. And so that was in 1960.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Senator Munt nominated you?
Well, that's another part of the question. That's a good question. Actually, Senator Munt ran out of appointments when I came up. And so, but I had so many letters in his office, and I had talked to him for so many times. Senator Case, who was the West River senator, had a slot. So I'd never met Senator Case, didn't know anything about him, and that's where I got my appointment, was from Senator Case rather than Senator Munt. Okay. But it all worked out.
All worked out. Okay. So then you went off to West Point and graduated in?
64, 1964.
Okay. Were you at the, Kennedy spoke at West Point in 62. Do you recall that speech? Or he spoke at the graduation of this class of 62, I think.
Yeah, I don't remember his speech
Okay.
that much because I would have been a sophomore, I think. And I probably wasn't paying real close attention, and you know, the cadets were all in the audience and everything like that, so I don't remember that.
Okay.
If you want a story on President Kennedy,
Yeah.
I was in the Glee Club
Okay.
it was West Point was all male at the time I was there. We didn't have any females, and so the Glee Club was all male. And we were in New York City, and we were also then invited to the mayor's house in New York City. And at that time, President Kennedy was there at that time. And I can still, we sang a concert, or we did a couple songs while he was there, and then as he was leaving, he waved at us, and he was like about this close and everything, and he said, "I'll see you at the Army-Navy game."
Okay.
Well, then he was
Assassinated.
pardon me?
He was assassinated?
He was assassinated.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying. Anyway, he was assassinated. And so then that brought up the issue of whether there was going to be the Army-Navy game.
All right.
But we went ahead and played the Army-Navy game, and so that was the last we were one of the final ones to see him
Yeah.
in public and so forth.
Wow. So, you were graduated 64, you signed into aviation? Or?
Well, the first thing I did was after graduation, or the first thing was went to airborne school
Okay.
and ranger school.
Okay.
I had signed up for ranger school and decided, well, I think I'll go to airborne school also just to get in shape for ranger school, because we had a month leave after graduation. So I did that, and after one jump, I just made an agreement with the Lord that if He'd get me through 5 more, I would never, or 4 more, I'd never jump out of a plane again. And so then I went, and then ranger school after, but I did get my wings, my airborne wings, and then went to ranger school, got my ranger tab,
Okay.
and then went to Fort Carson and joined a artillery unit, because in order to go to flight school, you had to go to, in those days, you had to go to one major artillery piece or infantry or whatever
Okay.
before you could go to flight school. And so I did that, and then I went to flight school and that was at Fort Rucker. So the rest of my class had already been called up for Vietnam if they weren't in class in any other field, whatever they were in. But most of them were called up then. So I went to flight school in 60, where am I at now? Be right after, well, it's when I left Fort Carson. So then I went to flight school, and that would be in 68.
Okay.
And then, no, not 68, it'd be in 66. And then I went to went to Vietnam in '67.
Okay.
And I was both fixed wing and rotary wing
Okay.
qualified. So I went to an artillery unit then in Vietnam because at that time we didn't have an aviation branch in the Army.
Okay.
And went to a place called Phuc Vinh, which was another artillery outfit. And we had helicopters and fixed wing, which was what we called a tail dragger, but it was observation to do observation for the artillery.
Okay.
And I got about, about 900 hours of flight time in Vietnam.
Okay.
And most of that was in helicopters rather than the observation aircraft.
Okay. So, and you leave Vietnam and
I leave Vietnam, I go back to Fort Rucker,
okay.
and then I was a flight instructor in tactics, which was it was a very challenging position because we had some cadets that had never flown before, obviously, and I was in tactics, and you sat in the back seat of the airplane, and they were in the front seat of the airplane, and I was smoking at the time, and I couldn't wait to take off to get a cigarette, and then I couldn't wait to get down to get a cigarette. So anyway, it was a tough time. But then I went from there to the general staff, which was called G3, and worked there. So that was a lot better.
Yeah, at Rucker?
Pardon, at Rucker, yes, sir.
Okay. So how did you transition then back to South Dakota?
Well, I decided that I wanted to come back to South Dakota. And I wasn't real sure of where my next assignments were going to be. I wasn't real excited about going back to Vietnam again. And so I decided to come back to South Dakota. And again, I visited with Senator Munt's office to see, because I kind of thought maybe I could get a position in either in DC or something in South Dakota from him. And another story, he told me that he didn't really have any positions for me, any staff positions for me now, but he could get me an elevator job. And you know, on the elevator, you get to see a lot of important people. And I thought, this is not going to work. And so that's why I came back to South Dakota and went down to he did suggest I go down to the university and get hooked up with Doc Farber.
Okay.
And that's how I got down to the university to get a bachelor's, or not, an MA degree.
Okay.
I got that from the university.
Okay.
So that worked out okay.
Yeah.
But again, then I had to find a job.
Right. Right.
GI Bill didn't quite pay all of it.
Yeah.
And so I ended up, the only job I could find was working for the LRC in Pierre, Legislative Research Council.
Okay.
And so I went, that's how I got to Pierre.
Okay.
And I did that for about a year. And then a job opened up or the position opened up in the South Dakota Municipal League.
Oh, okay.
So that they'd had some problems, and the director had to resign, and so they were looking then for someone that they thought could bring it back to where it should be.
Yeah.
And so I applied for that and got the job.
Oh.
And it was a great job. I mean, working for the municipal league, first of all, there was no other way to do the job other than to go up and make it better.
Yeah.
Because it was down a long ways, both from a finance standpoint and from a personnel standpoint.
Okay.
So, I basically went to work there and did that for a number of years, and it worked out well, although it was a little bit difficult. Well, the main problem was that, or not problem, the main concern was how to make the municipal league effective and work within the confines of the politics at the time, because that was at a time when there was a lot of party changing and a lot of problems with the Republican Party, and the legislature was all primarily Democrat, which is mentioned in your brief, and so they wanted to have interns within. This is how this worked. They wanted to have interns within the government, the Knipe government, but the interns had to be to show that they were bipartisan, why they needed one or two in the municipal league. So they took that, and that worked for them, and that worked. Then they could there was a federal program where they could get interns in. So that was one of the ways that I managed to staff the municipal league. Okay. That lasted for about 7 years.
Oh, okay.
And so then, and I think it's time for a drink.
Sure. Okay.
Can I do that? All right. I'm talking too much. But at least I got through all the years. Now I'm.
Well, and so when did you? Well, are you ready to go again?
Yeah.
Okay. Are we going?
Jordan, you're still rolling, right?
Yeah. Okay. So how did you first meet Bill Janklow?
Well, he was the AG at the time. He was, and I really didn't meet him too much when he was AG, although I followed his escapades a little bit, and because there were tough times as far as and he was a Republican, and so he had to also deal with the legislature. And the one thing in the legislature was, as was pointed out in the information, it was a lot of mostly all Democrats, and and that was the other thing, that I had a way of, because I had to lobby so much for the municipal league, so I had to figure out a way to get along with the people on the other side of the aisle, and so my politics I sort of put, or where I was at, I sort of put off to the side, and found ways to talk to a lot of the Democrats, and to get along with the Knipe administration, because at that time, Munster was the aide, or he was chief of staff for Knipe, and I had replaced him when he left the university as far as teaching was concerned. So I had a pretty good relationship with Munster, and so that all worked out pretty well. And I thought a little bit about when Janklow was Attorney General. That office had some difficulties too, because of the things that were happening as far as the Native Americans were concerned, Bill Janklow had come from the reservation. He'd been on the reservation and knew a lot of the folks in that area, and knew of, obviously, some of the other problems that they had. And so he was able to, he was sort of, as Attorney General, he was able to understand what was going on, but he was also able to know who to talk to and so on and so forth. So that's where he really got his start, and people started to recognize where he was at, and made a name for himself. The one thing I remember at one time, why one of the Native Americans that was sort of on the uprising part of it came in the Capitol building on the weekend, and supposedly was armed. And so Bill went to the Capitol building and disarmed him.
Really?
Yes. And so, that got a little attention from everybody, but the person that was, and I don't remember which Native American, who it was, but that ability to know what was going on, I think was very helpful for the state at that time.
Right.
And then, obviously, he got a name for himself, and we can talk about the rest of it.
Right. So do you remember the first conversation you had with Bill Janklow, or how did you?
Well, I had been out on the out in the area during his campaign, and I had left the municipal league at that time then. So, and I was out doing some campaign work and so on and so forth, and I wasn't on his staff or anything, but I was doing some stuff for the Republican Party and so on and so forth. And anyway, there was a couple times that I helped him out, so to speak. One was, he had an airplane, and he asked me to go up to, I think we were up in Millbank or someplace, I forget where it was. And so I went along with him in the airplane, and so afterwards, it literally, the snow in where we were at was higher than they pushed it off on the side, and so it was higher than the airplane even when you went down the runway.
Wow.
And the airplane that Bill had was a twin, and so I was sitting in the right side, just like I was an instructor, I guess. And anyway, we take off out of there, and he wasn't qualified to fly with instruments. He wasn't instrument qualified.
Okay.
And so we're taking off, and I look over, and he's sort of shaking and everything, and not quite figuring out what to do with all the snow on the other side. And I just said, Bill, I've got it. And he let me have that plane so fast. But anyway, I figured after that,
Yeah.
I probably can get along with him pretty well.
Right.
And because we at least knew how to fly airplanes together.
Yeah.
And so that was the first real meeting I'd had with him in the air.
Interesting. So was that when he was running for governor?
Yes, that's when he was running for governor.
So 76 campaign?
Pardon me?
So the 1976 campaign?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And-
you were working for the GOP?
Well, I was helping them.
Okay.
I was sort of in between,
Okay.
but as has been pointed out, I mean, that was the time also that, Governor Knipe was running on his 4-year term after he had his two-year terms.
Right.
And so he couldn't run again on the next time around. So then that's the campaign that Bill was in for governor. And like I said, I was helping him the most wherever I could, but I didn't know him all that well.
Okay.
And then it went on from there, and when we had a large number of candidates. I was trying to think of the names, and I couldn't think of the names that ran in that election.
Yeah.
But Bill did a good job, and he actually, and he knew Aberesk pretty well.
Okay.
That was
Sure.
one person that I knew pretty well, and because of the reservation part of it and that, and then I was trying to remember who else he got along with a lot of folks in the legislature,
Yeah.
so that helped him. But then when he got elected, why, then it was a whole different deal. And so
Yeah.
you can
So then, when he gets elected in November of '76, is that right?
no, in
Or '78?
78.
78.
In 78.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was elected governor in November of '78,
Right.
and did you go to work for him then?
Yeah. So then he put me on board, and so I chaired his reorganization
Yeah.
committee or whatever. I mean, I just was sort of the chair, and we had a great group. What he did was reach out to folks in the state as part of his reorganization plan, and we went around to different areas, and he would bring those folks along and then ask whoever might have been, say you went to Yankton, and whoever might have been in charge of his campaign and stuff. In other words, got coalitions together that could be supportive and understanding, and still, because we still had, or he still had, a Democrat led legislature
Yeah.
to deal with. I mean, we didn't have any of the primary slots in
Speaker.
the speaker and all of those.
Right.
So we had to, he found a couple of, or he didn't find, he he worked with he was close to Bill Doherty and who was the lieutenant governor at the time,
Yeah.
and to no, I can't remember who else it was. Oh, the legislator from up in Britain, who came from Britain. I don't remember, but he was one of his really close friends who was a Democrat.
Okay.
And so he had a couple people that he could, rely on and try out and so forth we could work with. And so anyway, but I will say, when he did get elected, and he'd offered me the position before he got sworn in as chief of staff. He actually we had to go up the night at midnight,
Yeah.
and get sworn in,
Right.
because he was afraid that if he waited to get sworn in, and his brother swore him in,
Okay.
and if he waited, why then Governor Woolman
Yeah.
would appoint another Democrat to the Supreme Court.
Okay.
And so he got sworn in right at the turn, or the 12 o'clock in the governor's office. I mean, and then he took over right then and there.
Yeah.
And
Was the woman there?
no, he was gone. And he'd left a note for him on the desk. But anyway, it was a fascinating evening, let me put it that way.
Right.
And then because then we went on with the regular swearing in later on.
Okay.
But, the inaugural and all that jazz.
Yeah.
But so that was how it all started.
Okay.
That's how it started.
So the farm crisis, interest rates, it's all kind of kicking off, and walk me through how he came up with the notion or felt compelled to buy the railroads. Or was that an idea that Roman had been kicking around, or?
The railroads were going to close down,
Yeah.
and for the farmers and the elevators and so forth, a lot of them were going to be bypassed, and they were going to not have any way to get their grain. They could truck it, but I mean that was expensive for them, and they hadn't had to do that before, and so that was a major problem. And so the idea was to buy the railroads, have a state railroad. Now, they didn't. The company or the state didn't buy all of the railroads,
Right.
but they bought the ones that were felt to be necessary, and it was so that's how it got started, because they were just I forget which railroad company it was, but they were just going to shut everything down, and basically from the eastern, probably from the river east, why there wasn't going to be any railroads. So that's how that came about. The farm crisis also was a major issue, and again, Bill had this idea of how to get Congress's attention, and so he and I didn't go on this trip. I stayed home and took care of everything else. But anyway, he basically chartered, I think it was 2 airplanes, commercial airplanes, and on the weekend flew farmers to Washington. And they all, now I wasn't there, so I don't know, but they made their point that they went and they went to the offices and raised some cane and everything, and then got back on the planes and flew back. I think they did it, I can't remember for sure, but I think they went on a Friday and then they came back on a Monday or something like that.
Okay. Did he fly the legislature there too at one point? Maybe that was later.
I don't remember if the legislature went with them or not. He may have. That may be, yeah.
I think 103 of the 105 went in like
Okay.
83 or 84.
Okay,
Okay.
okay. But then we had another march on Pier by the farmers.
Yeah.
And they all came, and a couple things there. This was during the legislature, and it was cold. It was, I forget whether it was January or February, but it was cold, and they were coming on the weekend. And so one story about it is that everybody got to thinking, well, what are we going to do? Where are the farmers, if they have to use a restroom, where are they going to go? You know, and so in the middle of the night, why we had to get somebody in Sioux Falls. This was the first time I'd ever seen, or I think anybody else had ever seen, porta potties. And so they loaded them up and they got them out there, and so we had porta potties.
Okay.
The other thing, from a personal standpoint, I'm out there and I go out on the steps with Bill, and I look out, and there in the crowd are at least 2 or 3 cousins of mine and uncles that were standing in the front row of the farmers on the steps. And I'm going, I'm on the wrong side of this sucker, man. I got a few problems.
Yeah.
But other than that, it went well. I mean, he went out and talked to them and gave a little speech, and
Right.
yeah, that went all right.
What was the real problem? Was it just access to credit and interest rates that were crushing? Or?
I think it was markets. I think just everything, and the banks were having big problems.
Right.
It just was, everything was just not going well.
Yeah.
You know, from the carryover from the Native Americans, and I think that's kind of, or sort of, what gave a platform for Bill to turn things around as far as the state government was concerned.
Okay.
And that, because the first 2 years of his first term, why it was basically dealing with the Democratic Party had everything in control, as mentioned in your notes, and so all those problems needed a leader, quote, and you know, Aberesk and McGovern were in Washington, and they weren't in touch all the time.
Yeah.
But Janklow was there, and he was sort of there for the people, you know, type of thing.
Okay.
And it worked. And then the second 2 years, why we had I think maybe one house I think was Republican leadership, and one house was Democrat. I'm not sure of that, but anyway, it started to change.
Yeah.
And so then when he ran for his second term, that's when got it back. But again, though, that was sort of my job security, though, too, because I could deal with the legislature and get along with them, and sometimes they didn't always get along with me.
Right. What was the Democratic Party's proposals or ideas that they wanted to do for the farmer situation that
I don't really, I don't really remember, the railroad issue and the issues, they were all basically, as I recall, the legislature wasn't in session long enough to do much about it.
Right.
Whereas Bill was there every day,
Yeah.
able to respond to it and be there.
Right.
So I'm not a big understanding of how all that politics worked, but I do know that if it had the Republicans were lucky. They didn't think about it at the time, but to have someone with a voice like where Bill was at, probably was really good for the state at the right time.
Yeah.
Because the rest of it was now. And also, I should also say though that when Bill came in as governor, the Republican Party was just defunct almost in South Dakota, and they had more problems than they knew what to do with.
Right.
And so they were unorganized, and they had kind of, well, anyway.
Oh, there's some old Governor Farrar.
Yeah, Governor Farrar had just, Knipe had just beat Governor Farrar, and, so that was the first step, so to speak. And then McGovern, and then Munt got sick.
Yes.
And was on his quote deathbed in Washington.
Yeah.
Case had already died.
Yeah.
And
Joe Bottom lost.
Joe Bottom then was appointed to go to, or elected, I forget first how that went. But anyway, so it just was all fell in on him at one time.
Right.
And so there was a lot of work that had to be done.
Right. So let's talk about the usury laws, and I think you know where I'm probably going to go with the rest of this question. What brought up the bill to relieve the usury law minimums, or?
Well, where do I start? Let me see.
Did it arise out of the farm crisis and
No,
interest rates?
no. Now, everybody was there at one time. See, if you get a lot of stories, everybody was. I know where I was. And I really helped with this and all this.
Yeah.
But I will just tell you this. One day I get a call, or the secretary comes in and comes into my office and says, former Governor Farrar is on the phone. At this time, he's in the banking business.
Yeah.
And he needs to talk to the governor. So I go in to Bill and I tell him, Governor Farrar's on the phone and he needs to talk to you. And so tell him I'm busy. And so about that time, a lady that was in the Attorney General's office had a brother that was working for Citibank in New York.
Okay.
And she had this is during the noon hour. I can just remember it, but this is during the noon hour. So she comes down and tells the secretary and myself that she had just had a call from her brother at Citibank, who was in the finance part of Citibank, and they need to talk to Governor Janklow. And so then again, we get another call back from Farrar. And No, so I talked to him, and he said, well, you tell him that I'm in Hawaii for a bankers meeting, and Citibank has big problems with their credit card business. And they need to talk to the governor. And so I go in again, and so this time we call him back. He comes and he talks to him this time. And so the gist of the story was that, first of all, the Citibank folks had just issued a large number, this is when credit cards just got started, a large number of credit cards. And they didn't know where they went. They just had all kinds of problems with it, and they sent them to some people that they had no idea who they were. I mean, nobody knew what they were doing as far as credit cards. And so they had put the word out that they were looking for a state where the usury law was, we didn't have a cap on the usury. And because in New York, the cap was at 12%. And so they couldn't raise, because the whole country was having financial problems at the time too. And so they found out there were three states at the time that didn't have a cap on usury: South Dakota, Nevada, and Missouri. St. Louis, that's right, I remember St. Louis, and Missouri. And so Charlie Long, who was the corporate secretary, he called Janklow, because he was in South America, and the president or the CEO of Citibank told him to get to South Dakota to talk about usury. And so, because they were looking at whatever state they could to find usury. Now, South Dakota had already passed, quote, the usury laws with no cap on it. They had done it in that session, and Janklow had signed the bill, and it was like, I mean, it just worked. And they found out about that. But they also then knew of, so we had Nevada and St. Louis and Missouri involved in it then too. And Charlie Long he was from Missouri, so that was another deal. But anyway, so that's how that got started. And they came out, and of course Janklow wined them and dined them, and
so their president flew to Pier.
They're Charlie Long, the corporate secretary. And they came out, and of course the because they were a federal bank, the state had to invite them to come to South Dakota. So they had to go out. So then and the other thing was too, the legislature had to be in session.
Yes.
And so we were out of session right then, but we were coming back with whatever we called the
veto day.
Yeah, on the veto day thing.
Okay.
So the city comes out and gives their comments and their spiel, and so now we have to convince the legislature, because the bankers, although they had backed the usury legislation, they weren't too sure that they wanted Citibank coming to South Dakota. And And so we had to convince them that this was good for the state. And then the other thing was that they had to do it within a certain amount of time, because we didn't, they had to. And then also then the banks the larger banks in like Minneapolis and so forth, they were concerned about this large bank on the eastern shore, that was going to come out here and sweep everything through. So we had to go through the process of just one little bank. They had to have a bank, but they couldn't get into the retail business, or they could get into the retail business, but they couldn't do big projects and so on and so forth. And that is pretty much how Citibank got here.
So the legislature, though, had to pass a bill that invited them.
Invited them.
And that met a federal requirement?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The state had to, and the other part of it too is, it wasn't that the banks were afraid of this from this big bank, but South Dakota was.
Right.
Basically, and then the Citibank people weren't too keen on moving to South Dakota because they'd never been beyond the Allegheny Mountains.
Yeah.
And so, it was a major endeavor, let me put it that way.
Yeah. Now, did they agree to build a building and hire so many people and stuff?
They did the typical on the hood of a pickup.
Okay.
Charlie Long guaranteed that they would bring 250 employees to South Dakota if this deal worked.
Okay.
Now, that worked. And their first offices were down in what was the bank building on downtown, and they set it up, and so that's how it got started. That's the whole deal.
Well, then let's see. Let's roll into DSU then. So if they're going to run a credit card operation, Citibank, they need really good postal service. And I understand from other conversations that they were impressed that a letter would go from New York to Sioux Falls in a day, and Missouri took 3 or something like that. Somebody told me that along the way. Did that come up, that the post office support would be there?
I think it did. I think it did somewhere along the line, but I don't remember that being a major concern.
Okay. But then they'd have to get the employees who could manage databases and.
Yeah, what you're getting at, I remember now. Okay, so then when Citi got going, and when they were out on the north side of Sioux Falls here, when they had their first building, they had to hire people. And so what they did was and especially techie people, because this was new computers. We had rooms full of computers. And so they got with Dakota State at the time, and they had some of their professors come down and be in the building and teach classes in the building, and then we would have interns or employees be able to get credit for their going to Dakota State, and that's how. And then the other thing was, the way we did it too is they did it, was to use the tech school, and so we put people that were trained in training in far as calling and that type of business. Why, we'd train them, we'd get a group and we'd train them out there at the tech school. And so that's how, but it was a constant, in the beginning anyway, getting everything going and everything.
So how did Janklow come up with the idea of converting or adding the computer science mission to Dakota State? And
Well, it came up because of the relationship that you got with Dakota State as far as bringing their people down here into city. And so he decided, and I think along with some people from city, I'm not sure of that, but he decided that it would be good to have just a technical school, or that's not the right word to say it, but a computer type school at the time that did nothing but get ready for what was coming with all the other stuff that I can't remember all of it that was there. But anyway, so they thought that was a good idea, and so he decided we were gonna get rid of the football team, we're gonna get rid of the chorus, we're gonna get rid of everything, and we're just gonna be a computer school. And he did that, and that lasted a while.
yeah,
And today, why, it's a little bit different.
yeah.
But he truly thought that would, and so did city, that we could, but I think it did a lot to get us on the road as far for the state to take advantage of where we're at today.
Yeah.
And it comes from that.
Yeah. I was doing some checking yesterday. It was House Bill 1357 in 1984 that changed the mission of Dakota State.
Okay,
And the House passed it 52-14, and the Senate passed it 27-4. McKellips was one of the no's.
that may be because he was in the banking business.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to ask you about that. What did the opposition wasn't too strong, but where was other than perhaps faculty and other people at Dakota State and alumni who had some heartburn about the mission change?
Oh, yeah.
What was the opposition to the?
Oh, I think just what you said.
Okay.
And it sort of also reminded me of another school that Janklow took care of, and that
Right.
was Springfield.
Yes.
And we closed that down, and I went with him that night, and that was early on, sort of, as I recall, early on in his time frame.
Right.
But we went down to Springfield, and we walked into that auditorium, and it was packed. It was packed, and there wasn't, you could hear a pin drop in there. And I thought, oh my God, we're not gonna even get out of here with our, But Bill went, he was gonna get it done. And he went to the middle of the floor and gave him what he was gonna do.
So he stood at like a center court of the basketball court?
Yeah, somewhere like that.
By the auditorium with a microphone
Yeah.
and just explained?
Yeah, what I was gonna do, and it was gonna be a prison.
Okay.
And it was hard, and I felt bad because the National Guard, I was in the Guard at the time, and he, because then I knew the Guard guys down there in the unit and everything, and I knew that they weren't gonna be able to hang on to their unit in Springfield too. And so it was quite but people still remember that. They still remember it. And
Sure.
so there were times that were interesting. There were but city ended up being pretty good to me too. So I don't have any qualms about city.
Well, it seems like so the state prison was full. We needed another prison. The argument that Janklow was making is we got too many universities. They're costing us too much money. We have a budget crisis anyway. If we could cut a school, it would save the budget. It would even out enrollment across the state. And so on the block at one point was Dakota State too.
Yes.
So Dakota State survived because they could convert?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And Bill had some real good friends in Madison. Okay. And they were about ready to not be good friends again. And so, but he stuck with his idea, and that's politics. Okay. So Speaker Lammers was a Madison guy, right? Yes. And he voted for it, for DSU's change. There was a Weese. Pardon me? A Weese, or Weese. Reese. W-E-I-S-E. Oh, yeah, Reese. He was a Democrat. Yeah, and he was opposed. He was a farmer, yeah. Okay, and Lars Herseth was opposed. Oh, I'm not surprised. Well, you're going to talk to him later on. You might ask him about that. Tell him Williamson has a little problem with that. Yeah. But, well, Shirley Helene was in the legislature. Yes. She was absent that day. Okay. But I think her husband was president of Sioux Falls College at the time, right? Gosh, I don't know. Maybe that was before. I'm not sure. Okay. Now, how do you switching the school from a university that graduates teachers to now a university that graduates teachers and does database and computer science and so forth? That's a different deal. So how did you go about finding Richard Gowan to be the president of Dakota State? Richard Gowan wanted to be president of School of Mines. Okay. And I think I don't know if he was a professor, I don't know where he was at. But physics department? Something like that, yeah. And anyway, Bill was very high on him. And I think he was perhaps at School of Mines, because again, I was with Bill and I went out to Rapid City to meet with him. And he decided that it would be a good idea, Mr. Gowan decided it would be a good idea if he went and put together what the governor wanted to do at Dakota State, and then he could move on then to be president of School of Mines. Okay. And which was a good choice. I mean, for what needed to be done to get to where we're at sort of today, why, President Gowan was the right man or right person at the right time, because he knew what needed to be done, and he understood what needed to be done, and then he also he was a good president of School of Mines also. So that worked out okay. Was there a conversation at the airport about hiring him? So can you share that? How did that go? Oh, as I remember, the governor just explained to him said what he wanted to do, and what his vision was. I mean, Bill didn't say this is my vision, but what his vision was, and Gowan understood, and so at the end of the discussion, I mean, we met at the airport, and at the end of the discussion, they shook hands, and that was the deal.
That was the deal.
Yeah.
Okay. And what was the faculty's response?
Oh, I really don't remember.
Okay.
I really don't. I don't remember. I really don't remember. But, I'm sure there was some gnashing of teeth.
And then Springfield had it, Bill runs for statewide office 3 more times after that. And Springfield ever vote for him again, or?
No, he never carried, what is it?
Bonham County?
Yeah, Bonham County. I think Bonham was the only one. I think if you look, he never carried that. He might have, it was also difficult in Yankton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, Janklow's reelected, then in 82. Yeah. So, you served as chief of staff through that first term?
First term, the whole term, yeah.
And then
That was a long
4
term,
years.
a long 4 years.
it's a barn burner of a job.
Yeah.
Particularly for a guy like Bill Janklow, I'm sure. How would you describe his leadership style? Would you call him ideological, or?
Oh, no,
Yeah.
oh, no, no, he just had his way about it, and he it was difficult at times to catch up with him, so to speak, but all the way along, I've said to myself, I was very lucky in 2 ways. In one, that I came from D. Smith.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, because you got to do everything you wanted to do when you were in high school and growing up. And I had a good family. I mean, my mom came from a family of 17 kids, for gosh sakes. And in D. Smith, not all of them born there, but most of them. So that was, but West Point taught me how to, you really got to work, and if you want to make it, and you have to also understand that you also have some real tough people that can give you a hard time, and so anyway, and the same thing was with Citibank. I mean, corporate jobs are a lot different than political jobs or whatever. I mean, it's and you have a situation where everybody is looking out pretty much for themselves, and you got to have a few people that believe in you, and because I mean we went from 1,700 employees while I was there, 1,700 employees to 3,200 employees at one time.
So when did you start at Citibank then?
Pardon me?
When did you begin at Citibank?
I went to Citibank after I was adjutant general. After this, I was a full term for Bill's first term, and then I was full term for adjutant general for the Guard. Okay. And then I went from there straight to Citibank.
Okay.
So it was a good place to have a little military career behind you.
So then you were tagged from 84 to 90?
From 83 to 83 to 87.
83 to 87. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you started at Citibank
And right after that.
Okay.
Right after Bill was out. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I worked for you.
Huh?
I worked for you. So you were at Citibank CEO in 89?
I was Citibank city, so I was there from, where am I at, 87?
Yeah.
87 to 97. I was there from 87 to 97.
Okay.
And what did you do there?
I answered phones for 3 months in the call center while I was waiting to go on active duty in late 1989.
Ha!
So yeah, I guess that worked for you.
Well, look where you're at today.
Yeah,
Look.
where I'm at today. Yep, thanks for giving me my star. What were that's a lot of growth from 1,400 people to 3,000 people. So
Yeah.
what were the issues that were driving that expansion?
Just expansion of the card business,
Okay.
and that was basically about it. I mean, at one time, Citigroup, at that what they were known as in those days, was the #1 card issuer in the country, and you know, that's changed a lot now.
Yeah.
I mean, they're still in the up there, and they have good relationships, but yeah, it just grew and grew and grew.
Okay.
We had 3 buildings out there just
Right.
full,
Yeah.
and we had a daycare center. For 200 kids, we had a daycare center. 250 kids, as a matter of fact,
Wow.
and right on campus.
Yeah.
Nobody else had a gymnasium and everything. We had all that on campus.
Right. Well, I would imagine that at the height of this, that you were the city's largest employer.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
In fact, might have been the.
Yeah, we were
outside Ellsworth might have been the state's largest employer.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I forgot to put that in the memo.
We'll tuck it in there. So, I did some checking last night. The 1980 census showed Sioux Falls at about 97,000 people. Now it's 205, something like that. It strikes me as it's almost inconceivable to think, well, the usury laws, Citibank coming, but not just Citibank, Premier, all these other banks came to South Dakota. And then, of course, Sanford's and others, philanthropy impacts healthcare, education, higher ed, and so forth. The ripple effect of that is pretty profound.
Yeah, I've said many times that I think that there are 3 things that have made South Dakota really go, and one is Mount Rushmore,
Yeah.
one is Citibank, and one is the Black Hills.
Yeah.
You know, and Citibank showed the state, I think, what it could do, and then it also showed Sioux Falls what it should do and can do.
Okay.
You look at Premier Bank and the money that has gone in their card business, and the money that has come from other sources. That money, those businesses, which are probably still the largest contributor in Sioux Falls in particular, all are financial businesses. Now, and before that, we were primarily a agricultural business, agricultural community, and we still are, but what we had was the packing plant.
Right.
That was it. And we sort of thought, and the other thing is too, that you look at Sioux City, and Sioux City is just starting to catch up a little bit. you know, but it's because, you know, that meat processing now is out of Sioux City, so they've had to find something similar, find something to catch up, and I don't know that much about Sioux City, but I just use that as an example that it's amazing the Sioux Falls area is just absolutely amazing, and although I talk to some folks every now and then you probably do from Rapid City and out there, and they say that it's just booming there too. It's just that they got a little bit later start, and so I think it's all been, and I always go back and think that it's not taking away from other governors, but I think that the timing for Janklow was the right time, and Governor Knipe was a good governor. I always got along with him very well, but there were just a lot of issues for the state to face through those years, and we got lucky. City came to town and everything was just going wild, But and I would say this too. I think, I've got a soft spot in my heart for the National Guard also, and I think that we were able to at the time sort of change the attitude and so forth because it was we had General Corning was there, who was also a mentor of mine when I got the job, and we were able to jump through the hoops from the World War II Korea area into, at that time, the Vietnam. We had people that hadn't been in Vietnam, but we had new soldiers and airmen coming up through the ranks, and so it made it possible. We got money from the legislature in that time for not the legislature, but also the federal government, for 5 new armories in the state, because our armories were going south, and one was in D. Smith, and then we got we changed where we got the training area at Fort Meade, which is in Sturgis. We got the federal government to turn that over to the state. Not all of it, because the hospital's there and the museum's there and stuff, but we have a lot of the buildings, and we have training area there, and it sort of took a jump, and it was retire. We had a lot of people retire and so on and so forth, and now we got Ellsworth and that's gonna be really a big deal for Rapid City and for South Dakota. That's nationwide. That's worldwide stuff that's going on there.
Right.
So anyway.
Well, let's talk about, you mentioned when you came to, started working for the Municipal League, and there's Democrat governor, Democrats in the U.S. Senate, Democrats in the State House and State Senate and so forth. And now that looks like when you look at the way it is today, you wonder, how did that happen? So I guess maybe the question is, how has the GOP built such a strong, what are your views on how the GOP has in the last 30 years, 40 years, built such a strong base?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with that we had good candidates, or I say we, the Republicans do. But the problem, and I think that, well, you have to be a little careful that you don't get too rambunctious, and so through the years, why we've had good leadership and so forth. And I think that we do now, especially in the Congress. I think that, I was thinking just last night, wouldn't it be something if you had Daschle be a majority leader from South Dakota, and then things get turned around in the Senate, and Thune from South Dakota turns around and be the majority leader. I mean, and I think that's another thing that once, especially on the federal level, if you watch what during my lifetime, I started out with Munt and Case, just knowing of them and so on and so forth, and then there was this guy McGovern running around the state, talking to a lot of people and everything, but he was a Democrat, and so pretty soon why the Republicans were all goofed up because, the senators died, and they'd been there forever, and there was ag problems in South Dakota, and the Democrats they could come up with programs that would help the farmers and so forth. And now, and in the legislature, the Republicans were just down in the dumps. They couldn't get, and so now today, you got the same situation. So my thoughts always are that if you're going to be in politics, and if you want to stay in politics, you got to pay attention, and you got to watch out for don't create too many problems for yourself. And I think that good examples of it. That Daschle and Johnson were good senators, and now we've got good people that nobody can really argue with very much in Congress, especially, and the legislature. Why you just got to be careful. You wake up one morning and all of a sudden, how'd that happen? But when the legislature, when it was Democrat they had very young Democrats, basically. A lot of them were very young, and they did a good job. So politics is sort of a.
So you think it's more personality, strengths than issues that the GOP has written up or down, or? I
think it's issues. I think it's issues.
Okay.
And if I was surprised. South Dakota, we've only had what? 2-3 governors, Democrat governors, and so that tells you, or that tells, I think anyway, that there's always that strong base there for whatever the Republican Party stands for. It's always there, and that's where we're still at in South Dakota. Now that may change, and the growth and everything may change a lot. But if you're paying attention, why you can, you should be able. It's obvious that the Republican Party has done something right for the longest period of time, and but we got big problems nationally, and this election is a big problem for everybody.
Yeah.
So,
Well, is there a story that you'd like to tell that you don't want lost to history, or is there something else that we've not talked about that you'd like to share?
a story, I think I told all the stories. I haven't really thought about that. I think the main thing for myself, for personally, is, I don't know if it's luck or whatever, but I didn't screw things up too much, and anyway, everything that to include, I start with, like I said at the beginning, with De Smet, which is a good community, one of the best, by the way, in the state today for small towns. And they got a good football team, and they got a good basketball team. And you didn't ask me about, I'm just going to go sideways on you, you didn't ask me about, Native Americans and so forth, but my senior year, we went to the state tournament in basketball, State B, and we played the Cheyenne Indians.
Oh.
Now, I'm going to tell you, it was like playing a pro team, and we got beat by 13 points, and they were great. They were great. I mean, they had some great basketball players, and so that was an experience but I think that the luckiest thing was obviously from the De Smet graduate experience, but then the opportunity to go to West Point and to go through that type of education, and what you learn and what you can do, and if you work at it, why you will do, and then to have a little bit of luck and be in the right place at the right time. And the mentors I've had, I mean, I'll start with my folks, obviously, but Sherwood in De Smet, and then I get out of the Army, and the luck I've had with the National Guard, and then the luck I've had, or I shouldn't say luck, but the opportunity I've had with the National Guard and with Bill Janklow, along with then the Citibank, and I had a good mentor there, a fellow named Dick McCrossan, who was tougher than Janklow, but he got me in the right place at the right time, and all that's been good for South Dakota, and so I feel like South Dakota's been good to me, but so have De Smet and West Point.